There was something about late evenings and quiet neighborhoods that made everything feel deceptively still, as if the world had paused just long enough to let tension gather without warning. Travis Bloom had come to appreciate that silence over the past few years, though he never trusted it completely. His house sat near the end of a curved cul-de-sac in one of those upscale suburban zones where front lawns were regulated like golf courses. Mailboxes had to be HOA approved in color and size, and the sidewalks were smoother than some highways. He hadn't moved here for the company. Quite the opposite. He bought the house after shutting down his custom auto shop and stepping away from business, hoping the distance from the city would bring him peace, or at least space to think without constant interruption. He didn't expect to be liked by the neighbors, and he didn't try to be. He wasn't rude, just private. People sensed it and kept their distance, which suited him just fine. The only things Travis allowed into his inner circle were his 3 Belgian Malinois, Brix, Dagger, and Mo. They were lean, silent creatures with sharp intelligence and fierce loyalty, trained with patience and purpose. Travis had started working with them back when his hand injury forced him to stop welding and lifting engines for hours a day. The dogs became an extension of his will. Not violent, but precise, alert, controlled. They knew the borders of the yard better than any surveyor and responded to commands with the kind of focus soldiers train years to achieve. He hadn't raised them to be weapons. He raised them to be guardians. He trusted them more than he trusted people. What Travis didn't talk about, even to himself sometimes, was the car. Not just a car, a machine he had rebuilt with his own hands from wreckage and rusted bones over the course of nearly a decade. A 1969 Dodge Charger, originally pulled from a scrap lot in Missouri, stripped to the frame and then resurrected piece by piece with a blend of vintage fidelity and subtle modernization. The engine was all muscle and growl, but inside the electronics were upgraded discreetly. Reinforced braking system, precision-calibrated steering, and a self-contained hidden GPS tracker wired directly to the frame. It wasn't just about aesthetics. The vehicle was a tribute, a piece of engineering that reflected the way Travis saw the world. Sturdy, purposeful, and unashamedly his. He called it the Dragon, and while he didn't show it off, he took it out for a loop once or twice a week, usually just after sunset, always with the dogs nearby. It wasn't for attention. It was for air, sound, and motion, a ritual that let him breathe. The car sat in a converted garage at the far end of his backyard, separate from the house and secured with reinforced locks, motion lights, and an over-the-air camera system synced to his phone. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. You don't build something like that and then trust it to a cheap padlock. Travis had seen theft before, had helped people recover stolen vehicles, and knew just how quickly a car could vanish, especially one with custom parts and resale value that only specialists would recognize. His garage wasn't flashy. It didn't stand out. But it was unmistakably deliberate in its design, and until recently, no one had ever paid much attention to it. That changed the day the new neighbor moved in. Her name was Karen. Of course it was Karen, Travis thought, not even bothering to hide the irony when she introduced herself. And she moved in with the kind of noise only certain people seemed to know how to generate. She wasn't just loud. She had presence, the kind that made space shrink around her. Heavy set, dressed in florals that always seemed to clash with the seasons, and never without her insulated coffee mug and oversized sunglasses, she treated the neighborhood like a stage and herself as its reluctant hero. Within 2 days of moving in, she'd walked the entire street, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors to update everyone's contact info for the council. Travis hadn't answered. She knocked 3 times, waited, then left a note wedged in his door that read, "Welcome, hoping we can all be good neighbors. Please contact me to register your property with the District Compliance Review Board. Karen L., Compliance Review Board." Travis had crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin. She wasn't from any real council. She was playing local dictator, a self-appointed figurehead pushing paper rules onto people who either didn't care or didn't know they could say no. And yet, within a week, signs started going up. New community board meeting schedules appeared on the bulletin at the corner entrance. Traffic cones were placed near curbs during routine checks. And every few days, Travis saw her walking past his gate with a thin smile, eyes always drifting toward the back of his property. The first direct conversation happened when Travis was hosing down the walkway on a late afternoon. Karen waved as she approached, a broad, deliberate gesture, and stepped onto his driveway without waiting for invitation. "Afternoon. You must be Travis. I've been meaning to speak with you about your garage." He didn't look up. "What about it?" "Oh, it's just a little unusual for the area. Detached structure, visible from the trail behind the fence. We've had some concerns about zoning, you understand." "Nope," Travis said plainly. "I don't." Karen gave a light laugh, the kind meant to soften resistance. "Well, the neighborhood's got certain aesthetic expectations. Uniformity, value retention. You know how it is. I noticed a rather large vehicle back there. Quite striking, but not exactly aligned with local codes." Travis turned off the water, set the hose down, and faced her squarely. "You're not with the city. You're not my inspector. And unless you're holding a legal citation with your name on it, I'd recommend stepping off my property." She didn't move at first. Something tightened in her face. Not fear, not anger, something quieter, more calculating. Then she smiled again and stepped back onto the sidewalk. "Just doing my part, neighbor. See you around." From that day on, the mood shifted. The walk-bys became more frequent. Karen stopped waving. Instead, she began appearing near the fence during Travis's evening drives, always watching, always lingering just long enough to make her presence known. One afternoon, Travis found a flyer tucked under his windshield wiper. It was printed on bright orange paper and titled, "Neighborhood Code Compliance Check, Vehicle Visibility Notice." It wasn't official. It wasn't even legal. But it was clear what it was meant to do: make him uncomfortable. Still, he didn't respond. He made no threats. He made no scenes. He simply adjusted the camera angles on his garage, set the perimeter alarms a little tighter, and reinforced the rear latch on the gate. The dogs were already trained, but he added a few new commands to their routine. Short, sharp whistles that they understood as guard mode. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if one came to his door, it wouldn't find him asleep. Then, one night, everything changed. It was just past midnight. A still night with a faint breeze rustling the trees beyond the fence line. Travis had been reading in the kitchen when he heard the sound. Subtle, metallic. A click, then a soft clatter, like metal brushing wood. The dogs were already moving by the time he stood up. Bricks reached the door first, growling low, ears stiff. Travis silenced them with a hand motion and moved to the side window, looking out across the yard. The motion light near the garage had triggered. It flickered slightly, revealing two figures crouched near the garage door. One holding a set of tools, the other shining a narrow beam flashlight along the edges of the frame. They weren't teenagers. They moved too deliberately. These were adults, equipped, calm, dressed in black. This wasn't vandalism. This was a planned operation. And something in Travis shifted. He didn't panic. He didn't grab a weapon or call the police. Instead, he opened the back door and gave a sharp, low whistle. 2 tones. The kind that cut through the wind and blood. Within seconds, the Malinois were out, fast and silent. Not barking, not making a sound, just moving. Shadows with teeth. The figures didn't hear them coming. And then, everything became motion. The next morning came with the kind of eerie quiet that makes a man suspicious, not grateful. Travis had slept in his living room chair, boots on, dogs at his feet, watching the security feeds through the night after what had happened. He'd called the dogs back minutes after sending them out, once the intruders had bolted and cleared the property line, but the adrenaline hadn't let him rest. He reviewed the footage 3 times before sunrise. It was all there. 2 individuals in dark clothing, one with a crowbar, the other holding what looked like a long tool roll, creeping up to the garage door and beginning to work on the lock. Then, fast motion, dogs bursting from the shadows, lunges, a dropped flashlight, a shouted curse, then a frantic escape through the side path, just barely clearing the fence as the dogs stopped at the border like trained sentries. One of them had fallen, rolled, scrambled back up. The other had tripped over a flower bed and limped off into the dark, leaving a muddy smear on the gate post. Travis paused the video there, noting the detail, then rewound to catch the clearest frame of the intruder's face as they turned in panic. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough to make out skin tone, approximate age, and the edge of some kind of patch on the shoulder. Not police, not fire, but something uniform. By 8 a.m., Travis had already cleaned the mud, rechecked the garage door frame, and collected what the would-be thieves had left behind: a partially crushed flashlight, a metal wedge tool, and, most telling of all, a small black canister labeled with a code. No brand. Likely commercial-grade animal deterrent, the kind that emitted a high-frequency pulse inaudible to humans but disorienting to trained dogs. It hadn't worked. Bricks, Mo, and Dagger hadn't hesitated, even when the device triggered. They'd gone straight for the threat. Travis pocketed the canister and, after breakfast, drove it to a nearby vet clinic he trusted. He didn't say much, just that he'd found it near his property and wanted to know what it was made of. The vet raised an eyebrow but took it without question, promising results in 2 or 3 days. Travis nodded and left. He didn't need the results to know it was illegal. He just needed to have it documented when the time came. Back home, the morning passed without incident until a delivery van showed up around noon and dropped a large manila envelope at his front porch. No knock, no doorbell, just a thunk and retreat. Travis opened it cautiously, expecting more flyers or threats, but instead found a formal document stamped with the seal of the local neighborhood administrative committee. Not a government body, but a self-run association of property owners, the same one Karen had been proudly representing. Inside was a printed notice. Notice of vehicle compliance review. Failure to respond may result in removal. Beneath it, a paragraph citing obscure municipal codes, some of them real, most twisted beyond recognition, and a statement that his vehicle of interest had been observed in violation of visual code restrictions. The most alarming line was in bold at the bottom. If no response is received within 72 hours, your vehicle will be considered abandoned or non-compliant, and subject to relocation or impound at the discretion of the committee. Travis stood in his front yard, rereading the paper, jaw set. The Charger was registered, insured, and parked entirely on his property. There were no ordinances in the city that allowed for relocation of private vehicles on private land, at least not without criminal charges or code violations from official authorities. This wasn't legal. This was a bluff, a push, dressed in official-sounding language meant to scare someone who didn't know better. But Travis did know better. He folded the paper neatly, scanned it into his records, and sent a copy to his attorney with a short note. It's escalating. By late afternoon, the dogs were pacing near the gate again. They weren't agitated, but alert, moving in that coordinated rhythm that meant someone was nearby, too close for comfort. Travis checked the front camera and spotted Karen standing across the street, phone in hand, talking animatedly to someone while pointing at his property. She wasn't even hiding it. Her gestures were wide, expressive, theatrical. Then she stopped as if sensing the camera's gaze, looked directly toward it, smiled, and turned away. That night, Travis took no chances. He moved the Charger from the backyard garage to his steel-framed trailer and rolled the ramp up manually, locking it with reinforced steel pins. The trailer had been part of his shop gear. He hadn't used it in years, but it was always maintained. He attached it to his secondary truck and backed it into the side yard behind the fence, out of sight from the street. Then, for good measure, he disabled the visible exterior lights and left only motion-triggered IR floodlights. The garage door remained locked but empty now. A decoy. Let them try again. They wouldn't find what they wanted. The next day, Travis received another notice, this time not from the committee but from Animal Control. A formal complaint had been lodged against him, alleging that dangerous, unlicensed animals were being used in a threatening manner toward members of the community. The signature at the bottom was redacted in the copy he received, but the handwriting on the envelope matched the same sharp, looped cursive as the last flyer Karen had left on his door. Coincidence? Not likely. The complaint included a date and time, the same night the attempted garage break-in had occurred. That was the moment Travis realized that this wasn't just pressure. It was a campaign. Whoever had been in his yard that night hadn't acted alone. They were working in tandem with Karen, or at least with her blessing. And now they were trying to flip the narrative. Paint him as the aggressor, the unstable loner with aggressive dogs and an illegal vehicle, while they framed themselves as the concerned citizens trying to restore order. He called his attorney that evening and explained everything in detail. The lawyer, a calm, seasoned man named Ryder, listened quietly, then told Travis exactly what to do. Document everything, respond to no direct provocations, and prepare a formal cease and desist to send to the committee. Ryder also offered to file a temporary injunction against any forced removal of property, just in case. Travis agreed. The wheels were turning now, and he had no intention of letting them grind him under. The only problem was time. With each passing day, the pressure mounted. Small things began happening around the property. Someone dumped a bag of leaves into his gutter line. His trash bins were overturned twice in 1 week. A loose nail was found embedded in his back tire, not punctured deep, but placed intentionally just beneath the rubber's edge. Nothing definitive, nothing traceable, but enough to feel the walls closing in. Karen, meanwhile, became more active. She hosted a neighborhood beautification walk and made a point to pass by his gate with a clipboard and camera. When he stared her down from the porch, she smiled and waved as if they were old friends. It was psychological warfare, dressed in PTA manners. Then came the second incident. This time, they didn't try to break into the garage. They went straight for the trailer. Travis had just stepped inside to refill the dog's water bowls when the motion sensor near the gate went off. Not the usual chirp, but the high-priority buzz tied to weight-activated ground pressure plates near the trailer itself. He glanced at the monitor and saw 2 figures again, dressed similarly to the first time, crouched low near the hitch mount, working fast. One of them was holding a drill. They were trying to take the whole trailer. Travis didn't wait. He whistled once, high and fast, and the dogs bolted out the back door, slipping through the gated panel he'd left ajar. The intruders heard them this time and ran. But one wasn't fast enough. Mo caught the man by the pant leg and dragged him halfway into the dirt before the man yanked free, leaving behind a piece of torn fabric and a scratched ID badge. Travis retrieved it before the dogs could chew it. The badge read, Inspection Liaison, Vehicle Compliance Division, no name, no city logo, no department seal. Just a laminate, printed on cheap plastic, attached to a clip with a barcode that led nowhere. Travis stared at it, turning it over in his hand, the weight of it oddly light. This wasn't bluff anymore. This was organized. Travis didn't believe in overreacting. He believed in facts, timing, and structure, things that couldn't be manipulated with emotion. But when he held that fake ID badge in his hand and reviewed the footage of 2 men trying to hitch and steal his trailer, he knew the situation had passed the line of neighborhood politics. This wasn't a disagreement over yard regulations or noise complaints. It was calculated, deliberate action, disguised in procedural language but executed with criminal intention. They weren't bluffing anymore, and if they had the gall to do it twice, they'd try again. The badge didn't scare him. What scared him, or rather what pushed him into action, was the knowledge that someone had planned this in advance. The trailer was double-pinned and wheel-locked. The car inside was secured with reinforced chains and a hidden kill switch wired directly into the brake system. These weren't amateurs. They had brought tools. They came knowing what they were after. That meant someone had briefed them, and he was willing to bet good money that someone lived across the street. He waited until dusk to make the first move, not because he was afraid of confrontation, but because confrontation in daylight invited chaos, and Travis didn't operate on chaos. He waited until the street lights buzzed on and Karen's porch light, always a blinding LED panel brighter than a football field, flickered to life. She was on her porch as expected, pretending to sip a tea from a mug the size of a bucket, probably watching the neighborhood like a prison guard on rotation. Travis crossed the street without a word, his posture relaxed but unyielding. When she saw him approaching, her smile faltered slightly, a twitch in the corners of her mouth, before she stood up and met him at the top step. "Travis," she said sweetly, adjusting the shawl draped across her wide shoulders, "you're out and about tonight." "I want to know who those men are," he said. No hello, no warmth. "The ones who came onto my property. Twice." Karen blinked, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry, what men?" "Don't lie," Travis said, his voice low and even. "You signed off on their badges. I've got one. I know they're not from the city. I know they're not from code enforcement. So, who are they?" Karen looked around dramatically as if to check if anyone else was within earshot, then leaned in just a fraction. "You're making a lot of assumptions," she said. "There are procedures in place. Vehicle compliance enforcement is handled by an external contractor. If they made a mistake, I'm sure you can take it up with them." "I'm taking it up with you," Travis replied, "because they came with your blessing. And they came to steal my property." Karen took a long sip from her mug. "Perhaps you should consider whether your non-standard storage setup might be causing concern among your neighbors. It's not just me. People talk, you know." "People talk because you knock on their doors and start rumors," Travis said. "I've lived here 3 years without issue. You move in, and within a month, I've got 2 break-ins, 2 fake notices, and a complaint against my dogs." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her voice soft. "Your tone is very aggressive, and your behavior is criminal. You might want to be careful what you say, Travis," she said, her voice dropping. "Defamation is a real thing. So are nuisance laws. I'm trying to help you navigate the system." "I don't need your help," he said. "I need you to stay off my land and to keep your hired thieves away from my vehicles." Karen's expression went flat. For the first time, the pretense slipped, just for a breath. Enough for Travis to see the calculating coldness beneath the hospitality mask. "Then, maybe," she said, "you should consider relocating. Somewhere more aligned with your lifestyle." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He turned and walked away, back across the street, his mind already 10 steps ahead. He knew now that Karen wasn't working alone. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was coordinated. And if this was about the car, about the trailer, about some financial scheme masked as a beautification policy, then it was time to hit back where it mattered. The next morning, Travis contacted Ryder again, this time with more urgency. He provided the footage, the badge, the documents, and a full verbal account. Ryder said nothing for a few seconds, then simply said, "We're escalating. I'm filing an emergency cease and desist and applying for a temporary restraining order against any property enforcement activity under your name. I'll also submit a public records request on the vehicle compliance contractor. Let's see who's behind those badges." Meanwhile, Travis took physical measures. He reinforced the trailer anchors with fresh concrete pads and chained the gate shut with a hardened steel link usually used for commercial freight yards. He installed a magnetic contact alarm on the trailer door and rerouted one of the external cameras to directly monitor the sidewalk across from Karen's porch. Every dog run was timed. Every patrol recorded. He wasn't just protecting his car now, he was documenting a pattern, building a case and making it known without ever saying a word. 2 days later, a white pickup truck with no plates stopped across the street. A man in a reflective vest got out, holding what looked like a clipboard and a measuring wheel. He paced along the sidewalk, staring across the street at Travis's property, pretending to measure invisible lines. When Travis stepped onto his porch, the man got back into the truck and drove away. That night, someone attempted to cut the chain on the side gate. They didn't succeed. The dogs heard them first. Then the reinforced sensor tripped, and a blast of high-decibel sound sent them scattering. The next morning, Travis found a damaged bolt cutter on the ground and a muddy boot print on the gate latch. The evidence was piling up. And still, the official response was slow, polite, indifferent. The complaint against Travis's dogs was still being reviewed. The notices had been accidentally misfiled. The contractor's registration was pending verification. All neat little excuses. Legal smoke bombs meant to stall while the real damage was being done behind the curtain. Ryder, however, finally made headway. One of the filings revealed that Karen had submitted an interim compliance expansion request to the local board, citing Travis's property as a visual hazard and requesting emergency powers to act on community safety concerns. Buried in the language was a clause authorizing third-party entry in the event of vehicular hazards visible from public access points. It was bureaucratic nonsense, but it had been signed and stamped, and that stamp gave her just enough plausible deniability to keep acting with impunity. It was fraud disguised as policy. So Travis fought back the only way that made sense. He hosted an open inspection. He invited Ryder, a certified property appraiser, and 2 former clients from his auto shop, both now working in design and law enforcement, to walk the perimeter of his land with him. He didn't announce it. He didn't film it. He simply did it, made notes, took pictures, measured compliance with city standards, and logged everything. Karen stood on her porch and watched, tight-lipped. The next day, a new sign went up on Travis's fence. Private property. Monitored and registered for legal audit. It was subtle, but it worked. The trucks stopped showing up. The notices slowed. But the pressure didn't disappear. It just changed form. Neighbors began crossing the street to avoid him. Someone painted a crude message on his trash bin. Sick dogs, sick owner. Flyers about community health concerns appeared on nearby poles, unsigned but clearly targeting him. Travis didn't react. He collected, scanned, archived, and passed it all to Ryder. The legal process was slow, but it was building. The silence didn't mean safety. It meant someone was planning their next move. And Travis knew. When people like Karen retreat, it's not surrender. It's setup. The middle of the week brought a change in weather. The kind of sharp, dry breeze that rustled the hedges and made wind chimes clatter even when the sky was clear. Travis noticed it because he noticed everything now. The softest changes outside, the slightest flickers in his security feeds, the distant hum of tires on asphalt blocks away. It all stayed in his head like coordinates on a map, constantly shifting, constantly updating. He no longer moved around his property like a man tending to chores. He moved like someone defending a perimeter. But unlike before, there was no visible enemy anymore. The trucks had stopped coming. The faces were gone. And that silence was more unnerving than the aggression. Ryder had filed the temporary injunction and received confirmation that the Vehicle Compliance Enforcement Committee Karen invoked was not recognized by any municipal agency, not even in a subcontracted or experimental capacity. The badge was a forgery. The contractor's registration had been revoked in another state 2 years ago for predatory towing practices, and its new corporate address was a P.O. box in a strip mall 30 miles north. Ryder was working to link Karen directly to the company's activities, but so far the paper trail was clean. Her name never appeared on ownership records or emails. She was the puppet master, not the name on the contract. That week, Travis received a message from Ryder's assistant. Someone had submitted a formal public complaint to the city's Civil Mediation Board. The complaint accused Travis of maintaining a visual disturbance and improperly housed equipment on residential land, citing community reports and safety risks. Attached were 4 photos taken through gaps in his rear fence, showing the trailer, the reinforced gate, and 2 of his dogs during a training session. The images were grainy but time-stamped, and they were enough to trigger a mandatory review hearing. Karen had stopped acting through stealth. She was now maneuvering the city process directly, exploiting civic channels with surgical precision. She wasn't just trying to harass him anymore. She was trying to bury him in red tape, force him into a position where his defense became his entire life, where every day was paperwork and hearings and deadlines. It was war by attrition, not by guns or chains, but by forms, complaints, citations, and whispers. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Travis showed up with Ryder and a thick binder of documentation: timestamps, surveillance footage, legal filings, inspection reports, veterinary clearance on the dogs, neighborhood noise level data, and a signed affidavit from a city zoning officer, confirming the legality of his setup. Karen arrived with a clean folder, 3 glossy photos, and a smile so wide it looked painful. She wore a lavender blouse that didn't match her pants and shoes that clicked dramatically on the tile floor as she walked. She greeted the mediation board with an exaggerated warmth that made Travis want to walk out before it started. But he stood still, said nothing, and let Ryder speak. Karen's argument was simple and sickening. She framed herself as a concerned neighbor who had attempted to mediate quietly, only to be met with aggression and hostility. She cited the dogs as dangerous, the car as increasingly visible and vaguely militaristic, and described Travis's fencing and cameras as signs of someone who had become paranoid and unstable. She even pulled out a hand-drawn map, not to scale, not professional, just a piece of paper with property lines sketched in highlighter, and claimed it showed the trailer partially overhanging community access space. One of the board members politely pointed out that such a map was legally meaningless. Karen smiled and shrugged. "I'm just trying to protect the value of our neighborhood." Ryder's counter was clear, factual, and backed by documents. He dismantled each point one by one, showing how every permit was legal, how the fencing met height code, how the dogs were certified and registered with current vaccinations, how the car never crossed public lines, and how no actual city department had ever filed an issue. When Karen attempted to interrupt, the chair of the board raised a hand and instructed her to wait her turn. That moment, that single gesture of authority not bending to her, caused a shift in the room. The board wasn't buying it. They saw what Travis had seen from the beginning. She wasn't concerned. She was performing. The board concluded the hearing by stating that no further action would be taken and that Travis was within his full rights as a homeowner. Karen nodded with a graciousness that barely masked her fury and left the room without acknowledging Travis. Ryder leaned over and said quietly, "That won't be the last time we see her." And it wasn't. The very next morning, Travis came out to find a fresh piece of paper taped to his mailbox. It wasn't from the city. It wasn't from any known agency. It was unsigned, typed in an oversized serif font, and printed on thick, slightly perfumed paper. The message was short. "You may have won the battle, but the neighborhood deserves peace. Sell the car, move on, let it go before someone gets hurt." That wasn't a threat with legal teeth. That was a warning from someone who no longer cared about rules. Travis held the paper in his hand for a full minute before folding it in half and sliding it into a plastic sleeve. He didn't need to confront her anymore. She'd just revealed that this wasn't about aesthetics or codes. It was about control. She didn't want him to be in violation. She wanted him gone, and the car was just the excuse. A symbol, something she could latch onto and amplify until everyone around believed her version of reality. Travis didn't feel fear. He felt something colder, more precise. It was the same feeling he used to get when rebuilding a ruined transmission or refitting an engine block that didn't want to align. The feeling that told him it would take work, time, patience, and that it would not beat him. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with the dogs, a thermos of coffee, and a notebook. He made a list, not of people, not of targets, but of contingencies, actions, routes, tools. If they came again, they wouldn't find a man waiting for justice. They'd find a man ready to bury them in it. The quiet didn't fool Travis. He'd seen how people back off not because they're done, but because they're repositioning. The calm that settled over the neighborhood wasn't peace. It was a tactic. Karen had gone radio silent, her porch empty for once, her usual passive-aggressive flyers and patrols vanishing like smoke. But Travis had dealt with this kind of lull before, and he knew better than to drop his guard. The dogs moved differently now, not restless but concentrated, always alert and always coordinated. Their instincts were tuned to shifts in the air, to pressure at the edges of the property, and Travis trusted them more than any security system. He didn't ask for calm. He prepared for the next strike. He adjusted the perimeter sensors after noticing minor fluctuations in the side feed. Not failures, just slight disturbances that didn't match weather or animals. The trailer lock was reset and reinforced again with a dual-pin internal lock welded in place under the hitch. The car inside was anchored, chained from the axle, kill switch engaged, fuel disconnected, battery pulled. The entire setup was designed to resist a removal operation, not just casual theft. He didn't add new defenses because of fear. He did it because the last attempt had been organized, calculated, not some rash act. If they came again, it wouldn't be with crowbars. It would be with equipment and intent. The next incursion was different. They avoided the gate entirely and moved along the blind spot near the neighbor's unused tool shed, cutting low through the hedges. They weren't rushing. They were measured. One carried what looked like a compressed scanner, the other moved directly to the trailer mount, skipping recon and going straight to work. Travis watched them from the garage window. There was no yelling, no panic. These were people who'd done this before, operating in tight formation, communicating without words. He observed, memorized gear placement, body language, movement strategy. Then he gave one command to the dogs. They didn't bark. They split and flanked. One went wide, another low. The third moved with silent purpose straight through the garden path. The man at the hitch heard them too late, turned just as teeth locked on his leg and brought him down. The lookout pulled something from his belt but dropped it before he could activate anything. The third dog cut his path off completely, blocking his retreat. Travis stepped out of the garage, calm, not speaking until he had clear view of both intruders. Neither resisted. One lay still, grimacing in pain. The other froze with his arms slightly raised. Travis approached, took the tool bag, and kicked the dropped device aside. It looked custom. A signal dampener, likely meant to bypass motion-triggered alarms. He said nothing as he zip-tied their wrists and had the dogs hold perimeter position. It was clean, cold, precise. They hadn't expected this kind of readiness. That's what gave him the advantage. That and the fact he hadn't trusted silence for a minute. No police were called. Instead, Ryder was alerted, and within a few hours, an investigator on his payroll had pulled one of the men's prints from the scanner body. The guy had history. Nothing on record that would ring alarms to the general public, but deep enough in private databases to reveal a pattern. small-time asset recovery contracts with questionable legality, tied to properties targeted through falsified compliance. Paperwork: his last employer had been quietly dissolved after a lawsuit involving seized farm equipment from a veteran's widow. Not a random thug. Not someone off the street. The other man had no history under his current alias, but facial recognition pulled partial matches from unregulated contractor databases. That kind of presence on his property proved everything Travis had suspected. This wasn't local enforcement. It wasn't about property values. It was organized, methodical acquisition under the mask of regulation. And Karen was the node. Maybe not writing the checks, but the one pointing the finger. She wasn't hiding anymore. This was a structure. A system built to make it look like a resident was the problem, while private parties moved in to remove the problem under cover of law. The incident didn't even finish echoing before the next move came from her. Not directly, not as herself, but through the District Community Board, a title as thin as a paper cup. A meeting was announced. Not public, not official, but framed as an emergency discussion about escalating tensions and neighborhood well-being. Travis didn't attend. Ryder did, bringing with him the investigator who handled asset seizure fraud cases for a living. The board expected some kind of defense. What they got was a layered, documented breakdown of events, names, companies, and legal inconsistencies in the so-called compliance efforts. Karen tried to pivot the narrative toward animal aggression and resident intimidation, but Ryder shut it down. No grandstanding, no raised voices, just facts, stated clearly with receipts and timestamps. The moment Karen realized the board wasn't siding with her, the way she suddenly got quiet, adjusted her sleeves, and avoided eye contact, it was the beginning of her unraveling. The following morning, Travis found his trash cans flipped again. Not new, not clever, but this time with a note taped to the lid. Typed, no name, no signature. Just one line. Sell the car, or you'll lose more than rubber. Travis read it once, didn't react. He picked it up, slid it into an evidence bag, filed it with the others, and sent the file copy to Ryder. The escalation wasn't in the threat. It was in the pattern. Each move now felt more desperate, more personal. Whoever was backing Karen was running out of time or patience. That meant pressure, and pressure leads to mistakes. Travis used that. He didn't confront, didn't reply, didn't give them any response that could be twisted into retaliation. He ordered a perimeter drone system from a veteran-run surveillance group and set it up manually. He didn't outsource anything now. No third-party techs, no installers. He soldered his own power lines, checked each junction, ran silent updates through a custom interface that pinged a secure off-site server every 5 minutes. If they came again, he'd have footage and audio from every angle, every second, with backup copies in 3 cloud accounts and a cold storage drive hidden in a fireproof box under concrete. He wasn't playing defense anymore. He was documenting a hostile campaign. That night, for the first time, Karen's house went dark. No porch lights, no garden lamps, no glow behind the blinds. Just a square of silent brick and glass. Travis watched from the porch, one hand resting on the head of the nearest dog, the other holding a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold. No movement came. No car passed. But the sense of pause remained, like everyone was waiting for something bigger to fall. He didn't know when it would happen, but he knew it was coming. Travis wasn't looking for retribution. He wanted closure, but not the kind you find in retaliation or spectacle. What he sought was a definitive end. A clean, legal, documented point where this entire structure of intimidation, manipulation, and petty control collapsed under its own rot. He didn't need Karen to apologize, and he didn't need the board to publicly admit failure. He just needed the pattern to stop. But what he realized watching his neighborhood turn from passive indifference to carefully staged silence, was that they wouldn't stop unless they were made to. The silence wasn't guilt. It was compliance, the kind bred out of convenience, not conviction. And Karen thrived in that environment, like mold in the walls of a house that looks fine from the outside. The investigator Ryder brought in had found something. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. One of the subcontractors identified in the attempted trailer theft had used a digital access key, a frequency code ping meant to trigger certain types of proprietary locks and alarms. It matched a signal type embedded in Karen's own home automation system. That alone didn't prove anything in court, but it confirmed what Travis had suspected for weeks. She wasn't just directing them. She was coordinating the logistics, embedding them into the local infrastructure under the guise of compliance operations. Ryder moved fast, filing a civil action suit based on harassment, property interference, and unauthorized access coordination. The lawsuit wasn't just about the theft attempts. It named Karen directly, accused her of violating private property rights by knowingly enabling and directing actions meant to destabilize and intimidate a legal homeowner. Travis wasn't the only plaintiff. 3 other residents, quietly gathered through the investigators' outreach, added their names. One had lost an old pickup to the same compliance contractor months ago. Another had endured repeated notices about a shed, only to find it dismantled while they were out of town. The third had been pressured into removing a handmade garden sculpture that someone later saw being auctioned online. The stories were scattered, but they had a common denominator. And it wasn't just Karen. It was the system she'd quietly built, one that looked like neighborhood management on the surface, but was in fact a web of coercion, resale schemes, and fear. Travis knew the lawsuit would trigger something. It did. Not in court, not yet, but on the ground, where Karen had less control over the variables. The dogs picked it up first. A sharp shift in behavior near the eastern fence, alert without aggression, then a refusal to cross into the yard near the tree line. Travis checked the soil and found a strip of meat laced with an oily substance. Not enough to kill, but enough to sedate. An analysis by a contact Ryder arranged confirmed the presence of tranquilizers, common in wildlife management. Someone had tried to disarm the dogs before coming for the garage. It didn't work. The meat had been ignored, but the message was clear. This wasn't about bluffing anymore. This was desperation. Travis doubled the perimeter alert range and replaced the outer cameras with micro-wides that captured audio and facial patterns in low light. He added a thermal scope to his side window and began sleeping in the garage office, which he converted into a command room. Not militarized, but focused, compact, and self-contained. No police, no patrols. Just him, his dogs, and the truth, steadily built layer by layer until it could not be denied or redirected. Karen, meanwhile, re-emerged, this time attempting charm, offering a cool-down coffee to Ryder's assistant after a scheduled filing. It was declined. She followed it with a letter posted to the community board, calling for forgiveness and peace after a period of misunderstandings. No one answered it. She had overplayed her hand. Too many people had seen too much. Then, without warning, came the final attempt. Not an intrusion, not a break-in, an inspection. A pair of men arrived in matching polos, clipboard and badges in hand, claiming to represent a neighborhood technical advisory team, doing surprise reviews of hazard-sensitive structures. The same language Travis had seen on the forged notices, now wrapped in new paper. But they made one mistake. They spoke to the wrong neighbor, the woman across the street who had been silent through the entire ordeal, but whose brother worked for the city infrastructure office. She called him. He called the mayor's office. And within the hour, 2 actual city investigators arrived at Travis's door, asking to see what the hell was going on. Travis didn't hesitate. He walked them through everything. The notices, the break-ins, the forged inspections, the footage, the lawsuit, the tranquilizer meat, the badge fragments, Every documented incident. Every neighbor who'd been pressured or harassed. He didn't editorialize. He just showed them what was. And what was, plainly and unavoidably, was a pattern of unauthorized enforcement, harassment, and attempts to obtain property under false pretenses. The city investigators left with evidence in hand. An hour later, a municipal injunction was issued, freezing all operations under the community board's private enforcement initiatives. Karen's position was suspended pending a legal audit. Her house lights went dark again. But this time, it wasn't strategy. It was collapse. The dogs returned to resting without twitching ears. The neighborhood's air changed, not loudly, but subtly. A few more heads nodded to Travis as they walked by. No one spoke about what had happened. No apologies, no speeches. But the tension cracked. And under the surface, a slow ripple of reform began moving through the very soil Karen had once ruled like a queen without a crown. There was no victory parade, no dramatic scene where the villain is publicly dragged away in handcuffs, no crowd cheering as justice is served. That wasn't how things ended in the real world, especially not in neighborhoods like this, where people painted their mailboxes twice a year and waved without knowing each other's names. What happened instead was something far quieter, and in many ways, far more satisfying. The committee dissolved. Not officially, not all at once, but piece by piece. The meeting stopped, the flyers disappeared, the veiled threats dried up. Karen's house went on the market, listed quietly through a third-tier agency with no open house signs or smiling photos. Her name was never formally connected to the forged documents, but the city's audit froze her out of anything that required a signature. She left in a nondescript SUV early one morning, 2 cardboard boxes visible in the back seat. No one waved. No one followed. Her porch light, the one that used to blind Travis's cameras at night, was finally off. Travis didn't mark the date. He didn't need to. He felt it in the air the moment her presence was gone, like the pressure behind his eyes had been relieved after weeks of strain. The lawsuit continued. Ryder pushed it forward, not for money, but for principle. Travis didn't care about financial settlements. He wanted precedent. He wanted a line in a courtroom record that stated clearly, private residents can't fabricate power, can't coerce neighbors with bureaucratic cosplay, can't weaponize silence and fear to take what isn't theirs. That was the real win. Not just for him, but for the others who joined the case, and for those who never spoke up but had felt the chill of control creeping through their fences. The city responded too, quietly strengthening oversight policies and reviewing the way citizen-led committees operated. Nothing dramatic, just a slow shift toward accountability, seated by one man who refused to roll over. Travis didn't change much about his routines. The car remained in its trailer when not in motion, still tuned to perfection, still guarded by the same dogs who had proven more than once that loyalty wasn't something you train into a creature. It was something you build with time, discipline, and trust. He added a new layer of logs to his home's interior, not for security, but for insulation and quiet. He cleaned the front gate but didn't replace it, scratches and all. The chain-link marks from where the bolt cutters had left their signature remained visible. A scar he chose to keep. Not as a warning, just as truth. Neighbors began to nod more. One left a 6-pack on his porch, no note attached, just an old gesture that said everything without saying anything. Another asked him cautiously about the dogs. Not to complain, but to learn. A few even began walking past the house instead of crossing the street. It wasn't friendliness exactly, it was respect. And Travis didn't seek more than that. He didn't throw a block party or hang flags. He simply lived, present, steady, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. The car rolled out again, once every few days, down the quiet stretch of road and back. Not for show, not for rebellion, just because it was his. The engine growled the same way it always had. Low, confident, unapologetic. And as the trailer gate dropped and the machine touched asphalt, the dogs moved with him, flanking the path like they always did, not because anyone told them to, but because it was what they knew. A formation, a life, an understanding between man, machine, and instinct, unshaken by fear, untouched by bureaucracy, and undefeated by the plastic smiles of those who thought papers and procedures could replace grit and resolve. What remained wasn't a symbol or a headline. It was quieter than that. It was a house at the end of a block that didn't flinch when watched. It was a man who slept without checking cameras, not because he felt safe, but because he knew he was ready. It was a neighborhood that, without speaking, had recalibrated its limits, not out of fear of what Travis might do, but out of awareness of what they'd almost allowed to happen. And though no one said it, everyone understood one thing now with absolute clarity. There are places you don't trespass, lines you don't fake, and people you don't try to move like pawns, not because they'll bark, but because they'll bite.